I give thanks first to the traditional owners here, which are the Gumbi lands here, and obviously they were the original custodians of this area. So what I like to do is, most of us here will come here in what we call literal mind. We're going to sit here and we're going to take notes, and we're going to really get caught in the world of literal mind. In the tradition that I've been trained in, which is the South American Four Winds, which is a healing modality, but the Indigenous Australians use exactly the same concept, that we have actually four major parts to being human being, to experiencing the experiencing of this world in this body. And so when we open today, we're going to ask you to open those four parts of yourself and embrace this whole 2 days and see if you can work in those four parts, because this is where we get our greatest learning, when we move ourselves out of the literal world. So I'll explain it, and there's a beautiful book over there on Aboriginal songlines and giving both the science and the history of how the Aboriginals use their oral traditions and this ability to entrap information into landscape, so they didn't have to remember all this stuff. It was like they had the first internet, and it's quite extraordinary. And we can learn to do that as well. So even by doing this little ceremony, for me, when I do my work either on landscape or with clients, it actually opens up my mind to actually draw in information that I'm not even aware about, aware of in the literal world. So it's a really interesting little exercise. So I'll explain the four directions. We're just going to face the south. So for the southern traditional people, the south was the direction of what they called serpent, or the literal world, where we acknowledge the stories we create as human beings. So each one of us has created a story that we believe is our truth. Now they say, if you understand it's just a story, in our stories there's always an element of truth, and that's where we want to start to really recognise and live in that truth more than just the story we've created. So it's honouring that story and letting it go, so we're available to hear information and bring it into truth, rather than hear it and just condemn it as, oh, that's not right, judge it, whatever we do. So that's the south direction. So then we're going to face the west direction. The west direction is where we start to honour our emotions, which without emotions in the human world, we wouldn't have the experiences we have experienced. But what we're going to do is honour that with Jaguar or Dingo, which is they're the fearless, peaceful warriors, and just acknowledge that we need to put to death some of our emotions that are no longer serving us, and live in that sense of truth again. Then we're going to face the north. Now this is where we're starting to get a little bit out there. We're going to start to move into the quantum field of our mind. So we're actually moving out of mind. And that's where we can actually tap into the infinite energy of hummingbirds. So if scientists look at hummingbirds shouldn't be able to fly. So the ancients saw them as drinking from the energy of the quantum field, so they had the energy to dream the world into being. So this is where we as humans have the incredible ability to create with our thoughts. So when we start dreaming what's out there, we can actually pull that energy together from the quantum field and create matter. And if you want to understand the science behind that, look at Joe Dispenza's work, The Supernatural. He's actually got the science behind how that works now. Fascinating. So while you're doing that, you can also call on your other people's knowledge, so great sages that have walked behind you. So when today you're listening to the speakers, see if you can hear the people they're actually channeling, whether they're aware of it or not. We're all channeling other people's experiences constantly, and the more receptive we get to that, the more we'll actually be able to not have to learn all this stuff. We just really trust in what we're feeling and sensing. But this is where we, today, want to dream the world into being for this whole planet, where we want to make the differences in our landscape. This is where we create that dream for our land, where we live, for our children's children. So you'll hear me actually reciting these oral traditions as we go through each one and get connected to it. So the last direction, which is the east, is where the place of non-doing. So they see that as the eagle, where you fly above it. And just maybe today, when you're getting a bit caught in the literal world, just go into dream state and just imagine you're hovering above and just witnessing all this amazing thing that's going on in this room. And this is where there's non-doing, and this is right out in the quantum field. And for most of us in the Western world, it's very difficult for us to get there now, which we get so caught in our mind. And then we'll just honour the earth and honour the sun and the moon, and just have this very ancient tradition. And the one I'm going to use is the South American. I'd love eventually to find an Indigenous who teaches me how they used to open what we call space. So is everyone comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Never even asked a block of land whether it was capable of running cattle or where it was up to. So what we do is we teach people the skills of how to read their landscape so they can determine where it's actually up to today. And if it's not ready to run cattle, then you've got to look at what can you do until it is. Yep. So you look at how do you build it. So this is up in central Queensland. So there's a couple of guys here who've probably seen similar sort of erosion to this. This is the things that we've got that are now starting to remove our soils. So this is a flow line, this is a floodplain here, and the floodplain's got incisions cutting up through it. What will eventually happen is that floodplain will disappear. That'll be out in the Great Barrier Reef, feeding the fish. Can't remember the data now. Someone talked about it in one of those podcasts I heard only recently about how much soil, and you talked about it, John. What did you say? 10 tonne per hectare?
It's 10 tonnes a year, that's what we're calculating.
Yeah, I think it's probably even greater, but yeah, it's a heck of a lot. Oh, that's right. He talked about taking a coal train and filling it with soil would wrap around the earth 17 times. That's the amount of soil we lose every year from Australia. Not the rest of the world, just Australia. So you think about that. Every time you have a rain event and you see water flowing and it's flowing brown, that's sediment. You know, it amuses me somewhat when I hear people talk about the Mary River, the Great Mary River, and how much a beautiful river it is. It's a disgrace. It's a cesspit. Every time it flows in the upper watershed, it flows brown. That's soil, that's sediment, that's fertility, all leaving, all heading out to the ocean. We shouldn't be proud about that. You know, we should be going, well, we need to do something better. We need to do much more to be able to prevent that being the case. Once upon a time, if there were flushes like that, we had wetlands that filtered it, which meant that sediment only went from there to here, and it grew more plants. Yep.
Farmers' days. 2018, that's what we now look like. We had 23 species in there. We went from 550 odd in to about 128 in, all foliar applied. And we were growing 27 tonnes. So 7 tonnes, 500, 128 kgs, 27 tonnes of dry matter. That pasture is not necessarily any higher in volume, in physical look than the previous one, but there's 7 tonnes sitting in that ryegrass there, more or less, about 3,200 kgs of feed, I reckon, and there's about 3,500 there, same pasture, different composition. So what are the big levers we pulled? We had to implement, and that was the big one. We had to actually get stuff into the ground. We started with multi-species simply because we didn't know where else to start. We couldn't even get seed. You couldn't get chicory. We got chicory from Nestle, believe it or not. Nestle, the coffee manufacturers, used to made Rick Coffee, which is a South African brand, out of chicory. So Yana or Jenner experiment is another thing I bumped into that sort of got my head around multi-species and how they work together. Have a look at it. It's in Germany. Yep, it's in Germany. One of the unis, Leipzig uni, I forget exactly which one. But what they did, they planted 1 species, 2 species, 10 species, 60 species, and every time without fail, the more species, the more diversity, the bigger the yield. So that got my attention. I thought, okay, well, we're onto something here, let's keep going. Because we were chasing profit. I'll kid you not, when we started doing this, we were chasing a system to get us out of the trouble. We were really chasing a profit-driven business. So the unintended consequence of that was having this incredible property that grew huge food. How do you control weeds? That's your problem, not mine. But I can promise you, you just don't have weeds. And when you see a weed, you just say, thank you, you must be telling me something. What the hell have I messed up here? And I'm going to have a look at this. This glucosinolates is quite interesting. You can use certain plants, not necessarily just brassicas, but to actually fumigate soil. So the guys are growing things like ginger and anything that's really struggles with a nematode load from historical corruption. You can use some of these plants specifically for fumigation purposes. And the brassicas and the other herb we use in our cooking, we put those two together and it forms really potent.
The other way I box that or put that line there is this is kill, kill, kill agriculture. This over here is live, live, live agriculture. So if you want to be in this box, you've got to stop killing stuff. You might be able to upcycle, recycle, that sort of thing, you know, that sort of ticks some boxes. But there's no more running down diversity and running down carbon when you're heading to the regenerative side. Now, on the degenerative side, we got a list there. We got that down pat. We know how to do it. We got tractors and sprayers and chemicals and agronomists and GMOs and another part, we've had fathers and grandfathers that have been doing it, you know.
And monocultures.
And monocultures, yeah. But, we got it down pat. But over on this one, this nice one, we've only got a few ideas. And there's a few people out there doing some stuff. What we've got to do is we've got to rewrite and we've got to make up this whole system that's all brand new and it's in a different paradigm. And when we did that RCS course last year, and they were talking about paradigms, when you go to a new paradigm, everything starts at zero. It starts again, it's a whole new thinking. So this stuff here that we got down pat, but we bring some tractors over here, but that's all. You know, so there's only a few things that we do. Otherwise, when we've dropped the poisons and the killing and all that out of our system, we've got all the answers for here, and we're not doing it anymore, we have to rethink it all up. Resets, right? We're given a reset. Everywhere's specific. Like what I'm telling you about now is what I've worked out with my boys for Nyngan, right? Now you might be able to use some of those ideas and that here, but if you're going to do it here, you've got to be specific for your situation, you know? So we can't do this broad brush stuff. It's localised on the ground. Right, resets. Down there, and it's a little bit different to what, see Kym the other day said he's sort of 4 seasons there, whereas ours, we might have the 4, but it's sort of summer and winter. Now, our winter weeds grow in the winter, but they don't carry on into the summer. And then our summer weeds start and they don't carry on into the winter. And it's that nature gives us a reset between summer and winter. So we get 2 resets every year. And what we've got to do is we've got to be timely with what we're growing, and with what we're calling our mixed species cash crops, is that we've got to be in the reset. So we start at the beginning of the season for the winter season. So as the summer comes off and the winter starts, we're in there right at the beginning. And so that's there's a timeliness is utmost importance there, because if you miss it, you're lost. If you missed it, you missed it, and then it doesn't come around for another 12 months' time. So you got to be right on it there. Now, just to frame up this reset stuff, what we can do is we can go and put in our own resets. So you run in with a boom sprayer and just create yourself back to nothing and have the reset. Or we can do it with the plough where we go in. But either way, with those two ways, we got to live with the consequences of it. So the consequences of the boom sprayer is that we've got toxicity and all that sort of thing. Plus we've been in the kill, so we've just decimated everything that we had there. And then with the plough, we decimate everything we had, but then we go bare. And like, you've got to have a real good reason to go bare. Real good reason. Because it's a long way back from bare. So with the resets, that's what we're doing, is trying to, and that's how we can get to be the no-kill, is because we get the reset, we get it in at the right time. So our winter crops are planted early and dry, predominantly. And so that the summer stuff's coming off, and then it's going to be, when the first rain happens, when your first weeds are going to germinate, you've got to have your plants in there so that with that, away they go. And then they're at the same timeliness as everything else. Because we've all had it where we planted a crop and the weeds had already had to jump. It's just a disaster. Yeah, that never ends very well. Yeah.
Quick one on that one. Charles Walder's book, Weeds, What They Tell.
Yeah.
I think it's in that, or Controlling Weeds Without Poisons is the other one. He describes in there that whatever plant, when you go for that reset period, whatever plant establishes itself first, establishes the soil micro and the suit itself. So
that's pretty cool.
If the weed gets the jump, it's setting all the bugs up to suit what it wants. And your crop's always going to be behind. So you're exactly right. You've got to have whatever plant you want dominant has got to establish itself.
Yeah, no, thanks, Arm. That's bloody, that's gold. That ties into my story for sure. No, I'll be watching that space. Yeah, no, and it's right.
It's like real, but then if you miss the window, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, well that
which is where I've been. But
yeah, no, cool, because that.
You're exactly.
Right, and then this is the thinking thing, working stuff back, unteasing it to put it together.
And I could sort of feel, even now, I can feel that energy coming up here. So we had a look at this and then we were heading off because we had another job to do. But when I got back down over there, it was sort of like, you need a stone. So I asked if I could run back and get a stone. And I went down to pick one up here. And no, this wasn't the one, but there was one there blinking at me. So I went over and got that one, took it home, and when I make the liquid crystals, it goes into a little device that actually amplifies the energy and stabilises it. So I don't have to put alcohol with it to stabilise the energy like normal essences do. But the interesting thing is, it's never happened to me before, that stone was giving off codes. There's about 50 of them. String of bubbles coming out of that for like a couple of hours, I can't remember. And they would change. So they might have been like a string of pearls and they might be different shapes or different spaces apart. Then there'll be ones that'll have a line coming off them with some other lines coming. So there's all these different shapes coming. And they might go for 5 or 10 minutes and then there'll be another lot sort of coming up. Then there was another lot of bubbles going off at an angle. They were really tiny bubbles, you could sort of hardly see them, but that angle would change. So they'd be shooting off at this sort of angle, then next thing it'd be up on this angle. So, and that was just, and that went on for hours, and it's like, it's not stone releasing air, because like it was only a little stone. And we had that thing going, and it was amazing. We've never sort of, I've never seen it before or since. So, and that's what we're doing, is the codes that we've sort of now got into a crystal called the Sacred Lands of Umbadir.
Oh, wonderful.
And then I really don't know why a lot of times. So then it unfolded once we did that. then we had to connect these stone circles on the ley line. So now they're all connected. At that time of year, when was that? That was the summer solstice.
That's it, summer solstice,
December.
yeah.
So
I say that this actually feels different to me. It has kind of ramped up a little bit. Not in a bad way, but it feels a bit more stable and yeah, a bit more stable and stronger
Yep.
in a positive way. And maybe that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. Yeah, I don't know, but I love the idea.
yeah.
Hines will, there's a protocol that Hugh Lovell and Hines would, but they literally douse through all the minerals and they, you know, can you explain it a little?
They have wiring in each end and they're a bit like a crystal radio set. They just magnify the signature of whatever you put in the well. Yeah, and so it's really just simple wiring at each end just to increase the signal. So they're like a broadcaster of a signal. So well, whatever your reagent is, it copies that pattern and broadcasts it out across your land.
Mm. And there is a map in each.
Yes, that's right. You actually put a map in there of the area you want to broadcast them to. Yeah. Each one of these will spread energy over about 4,000 acres. You've got about 4,000 acre radius, but you don't have permission to broadcast onto your next door neighbour's place. So you have to define the boundaries that it stops at.
So you mark your boundary.
Yeah. So you have a map of your farm and you mark the boundary that this is allowed to send energy to. So then you actually, say if this country was deficient in zinc and boron and it's too expensive to spread that in this landscape, you could actually put zinc and boron in the well and it will actually send the signals of zinc and boron out and the plants start growing as though they have more zinc and boron available to them.
And sighting?
And when we site them, we douse this spot. Yeah, we want to find a spot with strong energy lines. Vortexes are good. Sometimes vortexes coming up to broadcast the energy rather than vortex going down, but I suppose you map dowse. Yeah. So Hugh taught me to always map dowse before you go to the property. So someone will send you their map and you can actually map dowse and just find the spot on the map before you even turn up. You can usually be within 50 or 100 metres of this spot.
But just sometimes people know exactly. They know.
Yeah, and generally people know a special spot. Yeah, sometimes you ask people to take me to the highest energy spot on your farm, and people know where that is when they think about it. They say, yeah, I always feel good when I go into that paddock, or the cattle do well in that paddock, and people know where the high energy places are on their land. So just putting the substance in it's just an easy way to explain it. But really you shouldn't put substances in because they go off. If you put, say, E and soil life in there, it'll be really good for a week or two, but once it's had a few days of 40 degrees and cold and 40 degrees, it'll start to go putrid, go off, and then you're broadcasting the energy of something rotten.
You could put it around the outside.
Any sort of amendments you put within that 10-metre radius of these is beneficial. So it's really good to ground them with a bit more lime around them. Lime and trace minerals in that area is very beneficial. So instead of putting the physical substance in there that's going to go off, for example, like Sharbury talks about her own place in America, they had one and they got mould in the wells. Yeah, she got mould growing in the well and the whole house filled up with mould and everyone was getting mycotoxins, everyone was getting sick because they were broadcasting mould. So you've got to make sure you don't get any mould or fungus growing in there because that's what you're broadcasting. So then you can put the pattern of products in. And so you can make them homeopathically. So you can get little sugar, so we generally put sugar pills in there that have been imprinted with the pattern of the products we're putting out. Or you can, there are also Malcolm Ray cards, which are almost like they're like a barcode. They're a round barcode for each of the different minerals, and Hugh made a lot of those. So you could put Malcolm Ray cards in, but you can use your Malcolm Ray card in a radionic instrument to imprint the sugar pills.
So is it best for a practitioner to do that, or can a landholder do that? Like, can a landholder service that, or is it, do you get a practitioner to do that?
It's usually best to get, simply to get a practitioner until you develop the skills, and you've got to have a radionic instrument to make homeopathics.
Right.
Yeah, and so they're not easy to find second hand. It's hard to pick them up on eBay. You've really got to buy one, but then you've got to do the training, and they're a few $1,000s for these machines or instruments. And so it's sort of a skill you learn, and it's one of those things you've got to be passionate about it and be very clear about your intention and why you do things, rather than these are also driven by intent. So you've got to treat them with a lot of respect and respect for the earth, and they're there to help you improve the environment rather than forced production. So they're very good for balancing, making your land healthier, but not necessarily increased production. If you want increased production, that might give you a spike, and everything might do really well, including yourself, until it all falls over. So they're really great, and so they're just broadcasting this subtle energy balancing, and it's really good for topping up things like zinc and boron and manganese that you can't spread on a big area.
Yeah. So how far does that go in the ground, and how do you put them in?
We dig them in. They're probably the same length. That would probably be repeated. So
half about 18 inches.
Yeah, it'd be 18 inches or thereabouts.
But there's 2 wells.
Yeah, there's 2 wells. So this one, like they're connected with the thinking is the same as the biodynamics, where you've got earth energies, but the atmospheric energies start at about 7 foot above the ground. So it's not a basketballer walking around who gets their head into the atmospheric energy, but all the rest of us are underneath that layer. And that's why the biodynamic sprays, when they're putting out the atmospheric spray, the 501, they're actually spraying it in the air. And people are saying, how does that work? But it's actually, you've got this atmospheric layer that starts at 7 foot, where there's a lot of energy and minerals moving in that zone. And so the top well is treating the atmospheric layer, and the bottom one is actually treating the soil. And so you put reagents in here to improve your soil, but you put reagents in there for plants and seeding, and just to improve the flow of cosmic energy into the plant. But would you say anything else about that?
Well, it's like we can all understand the soil energy down there, and it's coming from the soil, but this up here is just as important. So it's like going into a polluted, alongside the highway and all the fumes, that's just as important, so we can actually clarify the air and improve. We also can put different reagents in to control different things. Maybe down there it might be something on the crop, up there it might be, say, birds or caterpillars. You can actually aim at where you want it to go. So I'll put the biodynamic preps. So there's some of the preps work best in the soil and some work in the atmosphere. Once they eat it. So when it's really bad weather, say really hot, we put the soil preps in the top to balance it. Conversely, if it's really, really wet, we can put the silica and those things into the ground to have a drying effect. So because you probably have more of a 2 season, down home we're a 4 season, so I try to change the preps 4 times a year. So as we're going into winter, I actually try and put a bit more silica in the bottom, add light and energy and drying in the ground. And then springtime is a bit different, but in summer we'll try and put the calcium in the top.